Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for coming. I'm Maureen Droney with the Recording Academy Producers and Engineers Wing, and today we're going to take a broad and fascinating look at immersive audio. All of our guests today have been working prolifically for quite some time in immersive formats, from 5.1 surround sound to Dolby Atmos, Sony 360 RA, and Auro 3D. First up, we'll hear from our host, Brian B.T. Gibbs, who's an accomplished San Francisco Bay Area producer, engineer, and mixer, and whose repertoire includes a wide swath of immersive projects. Gibbs is also a principal at both Toolshed Studios and Skyline Entertainment and Publishing. Our panelists are engineer producer extraordinaire Jimmy Douglas, who is also known as the Senator. Jimmy is a 4-time Grammy winner based in Miami, and he has a discography that runs the gamut from Aretha to Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, and Roxy Music, to Timberland, Snoop Dogg, Missy Elliott, Jay-Z, and Bjork. The list of Jimmy's credits just go on and on. There's so many of them, but that's enough, and it's all we have time for. Next up, Leslie Ann Jones, Director of Music Recording and Scoring for Skywalker Sound. Yes, that's Skywalker Sound. Leslie is another Bay Area person like Gibbs. She's based in Oakland. She's also a multiple Grammy-winning engineer, including just this year taking home a Grammy for 2021's Best Immersive Audio Album. In addition to her long list of album credits from the likes of Santana, Herbie Hancock, Chanticleer, and Kronos Quartet, Leslie Ann is also an engineering and mixing veteran of numerous game and film scores, and she serves on the Game Audio Network Guild Board of Directors. Michael Piacentini is a mastering engineer currently on staff at Sony Music's Battery Studios in New York City. He's worked on legendary projects like Cheap Trick's Live at Budokan. He's worked on Bob Dylan, Depeche Mode, Rage Against the Machine, Run DMC, and on the soundtrack for the film Miles Davis, Miles Ahead. Some of Mike's recent immersive work includes albums in both Dolby Atmos and Sony 360 for Bleachers, The Chainsmokers, and John Legend. Darcy Proper is another 4-time Grammy winner and a 12-time nominee. She's a mastering engineer with a diverse and international career who is now based at Valhalla Studios in Auburn, New York. Darcy has mastered reissues for many original soundtracks, including West Side Story and My Fair Lady, along with recordings for everyone from Billie Holiday, Yo-Yo Ma, Fish, and Louis Armstrong, to the 2 pickiest bands in the world, Steely Dan and the Eagles. 7 of Darcy's Grammy nominations and 3 of her wins have been in the surround immersive album category. She's currently working on a special set of original Broadway cast recordings in Sony 360 and a crossover classical album in Dolby Atmos. So our panelists will join us shortly, but we're going to kick off with an immersive overview from Brian Gibbs. So take it away, Gibbs.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you for inviting me to take part. And I'm going to bring up some slides right now. We're going to talk about a history of immersive audio. We felt it was really important that if we're going to talk about immersive and getting started in immersive 101, understanding what we mean when we talk about immersive audio. And as Maureen mentioned, we have a fantastic panel with us today. And so I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly. This will be recorded. You'll be able to go watch, pause, look at those slides if you need to once it's up on Grammy.com and the YouTube channel. And we will have time for a Q&A at the end. So we're going to talk about immersive music, spatial audio history. Is immersive audio a viable format? It's a question that comes up all the time. The difference between immersive music and spatial audio. That conversation happens a lot, especially with certain branding around spatial audio. How you can get started, what does it cost? Production workflow recommendations from Dolby Atmos to Sony 360 RA, Auro 3D, MPEG-H, and even working in ambisonics, if we're talking about game audio. And then monetization and what is immersive music production worth and pricing and artist budgeting. So let's get right to it. So the thought about immersive audio is wide spanning for centuries. We talk about it in the technological sense, but the idea of being immersed in music is far reaching back many, many centuries. Thomas Tallis had Spem and Allium, which was 5-piece choir in 8 sections, and those sections would be scattered up and around the hall, so the audience would be immersed. You could think of it as a 8-channel immersive choir, and that happened for many decades. And you had halls that were retuned, so the timing and the decay of those halls would meet what the composers were writing for those particular performances in those performance halls. So we fast forward to the 20th century, and you have the Alan Blumlein recording Mozart Jupiter Symphony at EMI using vertical and lateral. So here we start to have the idea of midside and the idea of Blumlein with Fantasia in surround sound not long after that, and Fantasound is what Disney used that. So that's 1940. Then you come up into the 60s, and Pink Floyd now is using what's called an azimuth coordinator, designed by an engineer, Bernard at EMI, designed this azimuth coordinator. I have a picture of it in a second. So they could move the sound around the hall, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a moment. And then Michael Gerson wrote a Journal of AES paper around height sound reproduction in 1973, made a presentation on it in 1992 at the AES convention in New York. So, 92, that's 30 years ago. And then in 87, a 5.1 digital emerged at Moulin Rouge, and they had an SSL 5000 console dedicated to multi-channel management. So Bernard Spite, who I was talking about at EMI, designed this box that had 270 degrees of rotation. And Richard Wright, the keyboard player for Pink Floyd, had control over it. So he was able to play parts and move the sound of whatever audio was passing through that azimuth coordinator to control speaker movement in 1967. So again, something that's been decades in the making. So now we move to what we've been talking about recently and all of the things that have happened in the last 10 years. So Disney's Brave was released in Atmos in 2012. 2019, this was a big conversation at the AES convention in New York because it happened right that same week. That Tidal, Amazon Music, HD announced Dolby Atmos and Sony 360 RA streaming. 2019, Sennheiser also launched their Ambio soundbar, which is 5.1.4. 2021, in June, Apple launched spatial audio with Dolby Atmos. And now in 2021, we have major streaming services with Atmos and Sony 360 RA, DTSX, MPEG-H audio. There are some countries like South Korea and Japan that are streaming MPEG-H for their regular television broadcast. And consumers just need $20 headphones or a $199 soundbar to get started. So immersive music versus spatial audio. And when we talk about spatial audio, it's really kind of the whole universe. I'll borrow Leslie Ann Jones' term, the universe of what's happening with that audio. It's very common in gaming engines, way before what we were doing in the music space. And the playback of that happening in headphones with things flying all around you while you're playing a game, or now with devices that are streaming movies and television and live sporting events that have all of that spatial audio happening. It can happen with a Fire Cube from Amazon or Fire Stick. It can happen with the Apple 4K TV. Chromecast is a variety of things that you can plug into a TV now and have this happening. What we're primarily talking about today is immersive audio for music and the music-based production. And also, a good way to think about it is the Best Immersive Audio Album Grammy Award. So production workflow, you've got Dolby Atmos Production Suite, you've got the Sony RA360. Some of you are familiar with Architect or WalkMix, which is the plug-in based system. RO3D has a creative suite, Fraunhofer has a suite, and then also Spatial Audio Designer, which has a multitude of these built into it. And then Sennheiser has DRVR and Facebook Spatial Audio Workstation solely for ambisonics in either Ambix or Fuma. Logic Pro, a lot of you know, has it built in, has a Dolby workflow built into it, with some exceptions. Ableton, and then Logic again, Nuendo, Pro Tools, DaVinci Resolve, all can work with the Dolby Atmos Production Suite in Mac. Dolby Atmos Mastering Suite you can use with the PC, and then Ableton, Cubase, Pro Tools, Reaper all work with the Sony RA Creative Suite WalkMix. The Dolby Atmos Production Suite is still $299 through Avid, and the Sony RA WalkMix is $399. You can buy directly from Sony. So one of the things we're going to talk about with the panel in just a moment is, if you go down this path, does the artist you're working with really understand what the immersive project entails? And what playback samples do you have to illustrate for the artist? Are you a good listener? Are you a good consumer of immersive audio? Before you start engineering an immersive audio, how much are you consuming yourself to understand the format? And does an immersive mix really tell the story of artistic intention, or are we just doing it because it sounds like we should be doing this, so let's do it? But I don't know, maybe the project wouldn't be the right one for an immersive release, or is it? Is a project budget realistic to include the additional production required? So workflow, which I'm going to bring in Leslie Ann Jones in a minute when we bring the panel back, talking about recording, like the initial process, pre-production and recording, and hanging mics, either tetrahedral or Bloomline, as we talked about before, room mics being super critical to tell you what's happening in the room when you're recording, and then completing the two mix first at a higher resolution, and then downsampling, because your ADMs and your walk mix, everything in immersive right now is going to be 2448. There are some workflows that can work simultaneously, but again, you're going to have to downsample if you're working at 192 or 96 to have your release to be in 2448. And then working on headphones is one option, but you have to ask, would you send your two mix out with checking it on speakers? What process do you follow? We're going to talk about mastering for immersive. That's going to definitely be a part of the conversation. Speaker layouts, time alignment, bass management. When you have a speaker installation, 512 at a minimum, 714 recommended for majority of these formats, 715, I guess 915 or 6 for RO3D. And then again, like I mentioned, mastering is so crucial with multi-channel audio. So that was quick. If I went through the slides too fast, you can watch the recording after the fact, but I'd like to bring the panelists back in. I'm going to turn my sharing off and ask everyone to turn their video back on and unmute. And as I mentioned, Leslie, I'd like to start with you, but there's Michael Piacentini, Leslie Ann Jones, Jimmy Douglas, Darcy Proper. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So, Leslie, the recording process, and by the way, congratulations on your recent win.
Thank you.
How critical is this process of pre-production, hanging extra mics, or having the right microphones in the room to tell you what's going on before you get to the part of mixing for immersive?
Well, I suppose it's easiest to talk about the album that won, which is Soundtrack of the American Soldier by the U.S. Army Field Band. And that was designed from the very beginning to be immersive. Field band, I think, is about 65 members. Of course, it's a field band, so it's brass, winds, percussion, no strings other than a upright bass and harp. And Dan Mercurio was the producer, and we talked from the very get-go about doing it that way, including how the band was going to be laid out in the studio and how to focus the most appropriate section of the band in the sphere of speakers. So when I did my miking choices, I did it in pairs so that I could take sections and be able to move them around if I needed to. We also started in 714 and then ended up in 514. So when we were recording, we were monitoring in 714. And then ultimately, Dan and I decided, because then when we recorded the record, most receivers couldn't do native 714. They would downsample to 514. And we decided we wanted to do a native 514 and not leave it up to the equipment to determine how things were going to be. So basically, the band moved around. And if we wanted to focus the saxes in the middle, we moved the saxes to the middle, trombones to the left or right, clarinets were mostly in the back. Most of the project, the chorus, 24-person chorus, I think, was in the back, except for some traditional tunes like God Bless America, where we'd probably be killed if the chorus was in the back, so we put them in the front. All this was done in meetings, drawings, and all of that. I don't know if one has to go through that kind of pre-production, but I think if you're thinking from a recording standpoint, and of course, so much immersive is done remixing existing material or mixing from new stuff and not thinking about immersive when you're recording, that I think that that's the most important thing. And as you mentioned, not every project is the right project for immersive. If you've got solo piano, it might not be the best idea to have, half the strings in the back and half of them in the front. But that's the kind of process that I go through when I'm doing immersive. And even if I don't know if the client has the budget, I still hang height mics now in the hopes that at some point someone will have the money and to be able to remix it, and then you're not trying to create it.
I think that's a really important point. Hard drive space has gotten pretty cheap, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
channels.
I was talking about that even when it was 5.1 before it was immersive. It's hanging two mics in the back of the room as your surround mics. It's just 2 tracks of data, and it might come in really handy.
And I think I mentioned this to you before, but it was wonderful to see a couple of members of the Army Field Band at the premiere ceremony.
Oh yeah, that
stand up and everybody recognized them. Yeah,
that was great. Yeah, thanks for that.
So, Jimmy, you probably get sent a lot of console audio catalog work, maybe some remix that didn't have the thought process ahead of time of hanging these extra mics. Where do you kind of start? If this is going to turn into something immersive, how do you start thinking, what do you listen to first and start making those immersive decisions when you're going to go from stereo to multi-channels?
Well, first of all, well, it seems that some of the records I'm getting lately, they're records that they're coming out as a popular record. And part of the guideline for me is that they've got to sound like the record that's out, the stereo version that was made by a producer and the artist. And that takes precedent over all the rest of it, because when it gets out of pocket, it's not the record that they're trying to sell. So it's not even as if I'm like, going, oh, this is gonna be amazing. I'll put this there and do that and make it feel this way. I did get lucky with one record though, that I actually was a part of doing the original, the Justin Timberlake Future Sex Love songs, which was done relatively a while ago, where when I recorded it, there was nobody in the room but me that whole album. I hadn't have an assistant or anything. So needless to say, there are no stems. There was no time for stems. Are you kidding me? It was an analog console tape, and I just had to get it done. Not knowing that immersive would come along 15 years later. And so in that case, it was a little more creative for me, because I had the whole field of the spectrum, and I also knew the people that made the record, and I know how they think, and I know how they would appreciate some of the things I was doing. On the other hand, there's some records I'm doing where the executives from the record companies are chiming in and telling me to change things. I don't like this, things are panning. Really? I thought you were supposed to sell records, not tell me how to make them. But that's kind of what's, we're caught in this thing right now where, like they too were afraid of it sounding different than what they were sold in the first place. So that's kind of my thing. I haven't had the luxury of starting from day one. Everybody I work with, we talk about it. It's going to be amazing when we do this and do that, but we're all busy working. We don't have that luxury yet.
I think is an important comment you make about our responsibility of making sure that what goes out is really good quality, because the format is so new. And we want people that are hearing these mixes to say, oh, that's how I felt when I heard that stereo mix, right, for these catalog remixes. Yeah. And do you choose like a perspective, like, okay, I can put this music anywhere, I can put the drummer anywhere I want, but keeping it in stereo, are you thinking, like, are you visualizing like what the band is looking like? How are you choosing like singer placement, that sort of thing?
So for me, because I spent a lot of time doing 5.1 surround, and I liked that world. What I've always done, and I still do it, I mean, I realized like we have little flaps behind our ears, and we don't hear as well back there. We just don't. I mean, we have the peripheral hearing, but the flaps stop it. Everything is in front of us. Our eyes support what we see, and the field is kind of here. And of course, there's all that other stuff going on. But for me, I don't really sit in the middle and go, oh, it's all around me. I'm like, I'm used to having the vocal come in my face from here or up here in front of me, because it's the main thing that really has to anchor it. And the rest, for me, just for me, the rest of it kind of supports what it was. And I kind of look at it more like, if the band was kind of there, and a band, most of my stuff isn't a band anymore, but that the modern band, as they call it. But if they were there, it's like I'd be looking here for them. I wouldn't be standing around, turning around, looking behind me. I'd be looking here. And to me, the energy should come kind of here, so that if you kind of are sitting where you're sitting, you're going to get most of the energy where it really does the most work. That's just the way that I see it.
So that brings me back to Leslie for a moment, and thinking about the perspective of like the field band. So did you think of it from like a concert point of view, or did you think of it like how they were seated when they were recorded? But you talked about them moving around as well. So how did you make perspective decisions?
Well, Dan, the producer, went to the rehearsals. So he had kind of first take of sort of what each of the songs sounded like, what section should be featured. And thank goodness we had a willing band who follow orders and were able to move around. And that's really how we decided, which is why I decided to, of course, we had a tree and surrounds and height mics and all of that kind of room stuff. But I wanted to be able to manipulate the front to side, because we were originally 7-1, and then side to back by having stereo pairs. And that was the easiest way to manipulate it around. And that came in really handy when we went down to 5-1-4 instead of 7-1-4, because then I could fill in that space in a phantom way because I had pairs that I could move around. So yeah, the band physically, members of the band moved around, their music moved around, but the mics pretty much stayed the same. And so in the end, what we heard when we were recording, when we went to mix, we had very little to do other than maybe featuring some things, because the way we had envisioned it in the beginning is the way it sounded. And when you hear that record, what you're hearing is that space and those people coming out of those speakers, not manipulated by a pan pot, but actually that's where they were placed.
I love that. That's all that pre-production conversation. And you don't have to have a scoring stage to do that. I mean, you have the luxury of space where it was recorded, but at the same time, those decisions can be made even with a smaller group in a smaller studio space. So that's awesome. I love that. And one other question, when you say for immersive, was it Atmos? Was it like a specific format that you would?
Yeah, it was Atmos.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit, Michael. I'm going to bring you in on binaural conversation, because you work in Sony 360. So working with the mixes that you do, it's less about this pre-production, right? You're working with previously recorded audio, similarly what Jimmy's doing, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And working, you do work in Atmos, but you work a lot in either Architect or Walk Mix. How does that decision change for you? Because you are thinking binaurally initially, or are you thinking channel and then like how's that workflow? What's that look like?
Yeah, so I guess kind of format independent. The way it usually starts on any kind of project for me is I take either existing stems or we go back to the multis and kind of make stems and try to match the original stereo mix. And then I take the stereo stems and I master them in a 2-channel, channel-based format to match the stereo mastered release. Then I have like what I'm calling prepped stems that I kind of take into my Pro Tools sessions that I do my immersive mixing in, where then I'll start my automation, my panning, and my EQ kind of dependent on the binaural mix I'm doing from these prepared stems that I know are like sequenced and matched to the stereo release.
So so when you bring that into Pro Tools, are you already thinking, I know this is going to be 360 or this could be 360 in Atmos, and working that session in thinking of it in both formats simultaneously?
Yeah, so at this point, almost every mix I do is both formats. And, unfortunately, I don't think there is like a quick conversion process right now, just because of the way the speaker layouts are in both formats. In Atmos, you have the 2 extra side speakers at 90 degrees, and in 360, you have the bottom speakers and an additional top speaker. So, but both formats are object-based. And so, you're panning things around this like, artificial room kind of thing that they've built into each format. And so, while certain positions work in one format, they might not work in the other format. However, you have like if I'm like, okay, a guitar should probably go at like 110 degrees, you kind of take that object and massage it in the other format, and it, should carry the same kind of intent. And if it doesn't, then, I start moving it around again. But yeah, both formats I'm going into for almost every mix at this point. And so it's, building each one of them independently, but with that, kind of binaural rendering mindset, I guess.
So you teed it up perfectly. Thank you. Because I want to go back to Jimmy and Leslie. Jimmy, I'll start with you. So checking headphones, right? Working on speakers, but what's the equivalent car test, I guess, the checking your immersive, checking binaural. Jimmy, how are you approaching that? Because people are going to be listening on earbuds. We can't avoid
that. This has really been a true awakening for me, because for a long time I was just to preface it, when mixing regular stereo, whatever, for years, I just don't do headphones. And this is a joke that Jimmy has when I mix with people. They go, I'm going to go to the car. I'm going, we don't do cars. Okay. So I'm not that guy that likes to do all that. I like to make a mix. I know what I got, and that's what I got. And if I don't got it, then I don't got it. But I'm not going to listen to all these different ways, because it just confuses me. So I said that to preface that when I started doing the Atmos stuff and the 360, I wasn't really listening in the phones. And the shit sounded phenomenal where I was. It was just really cool and very exciting and very all that. And then I went to the phone. Somebody at one of those places said, hey, and they listened to the phones, and I listened. I was like, holy shit. It didn't sound anything like what I was doing up here at all. So now I'm in this mode where like I'm spending a lot of time going back and forth until I can kind of bring the two of them kind of close together to each. So in the phones, it feels like the stereo mix, with a little bit of that air or whatever it is, but it kind of feels like the stereo mix. And then when you come up here, it may not be as magnificent, but it also doesn't change in the phone. So you have to kind of play the field for all. That's how I approach it.
And Leslie, I'll ask you the same question, because you had it set up right. Everything just kind of worked. Wasn't mix heavy because maybe features like you mentioned or soloists, but how did the headphone translation process work?
Well, I have to point out that this was the best immersive audio album of the 63rd Grammys, which was in 2020. It would have been given out in 2021, but it wasn't because of the pandemic. So if you think about that, the record was done, quite a while ago, and not long before, but headphones just weren't something that we even thought about. Michael Romanowski, who mastered the record, of course, masters it with that in mind. And if I want to listen to headphones, I can do it there. I might think about things differently now because formats have changed. I mean, gosh, just in the last 18 months, things have just skyrocketed. So you almost can't do anything now without listening to it in headphones to see how it might translate. I still don't know, frankly, if I would make a really important mix decision based on headphones rather than speakers. If the mix decision sounds great on speakers and sounds so-so on headphones, I don't think it. I think I would go with what sounds great on speakers, personally. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, short of like a percussion instrument totally disappearing or something to that effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So this is setting up for me to come back to Darcy, because this now gets into the mastering piece, and you teed that up perfectly, Leslie. Thank you. So, Michael, I'll start with you. So, time-based effects, reverbs, delays, right? We can put those all over the place. But when you start opening up a mix, and you have masking in stereo now, I don't want to say it's not a thing, but it becomes less of a thing because everything's got its own space. So when you start using time-based effects, has your decision-making process even changed for what you do in stereo, Michael, and to preserve what you're doing immersive?
Absolutely. I mean, again, a lot of these things are going through an HRTF or binaural renderer function at this point in immersive audio mixing, and so you kind of have to take that into consideration, and how that additional processing on top of your objects is going to be taken into account once it gets folded down into a stereo based format. A 2-channel render at the end of the day is how I'd say most people are listening and consuming these mixes in headphones. And so you have to kind of take into consideration how those objects with reverbs and delays are going to be affected by the HRTF calibration at the end.
And do you find, since you're making a lot of headphone decisions in 360, in terms of that one import kind of workflow, is it 360 Atmos 360? Is it go either way?
Yeah, I can go. It doesn't. I don't think one is particularly easier or better to start from than another. I think that I'm kind of approaching them both where I'm loading everything in as an object into my Pro Tools session, and then I'm doing panning and decision making based on where I think the object should go, kind of format independent rather, and then kind of seeing, okay, this works in Atmos, this doesn't work in Atmos, this works in 360, this doesn't work in 360, and kind of then I'll like save 2 separate sessions. Okay, I'll be like, okay, I'm clearly going in one path right now with Atmos. Let's hone in on that, and then hop back to 360 and try to massage it from there, or vice versa.
So, Leslie, similar question about the time-based effects. And thank you for that, Michael. About time-based effects and maybe using the room, less of the room, the extra mics that you do you find you were making different decisions immersive that you would stereo?
Well, we did the 514 mix first, and then a 5.1, and then a stereo. So yeah, there were balance decisions made based on how much of the heights. It's really interesting about the heights because sometimes they can really add this special fairy dust to stuff, and sometimes they just get in the way. And it's different for every tune. So I would just experiment with how much of them I needed, whether it enhanced what I was doing or whether it detracted. And whenever detracted from it was gone.
No need to go bananas with the panner and make everyone nauseous, right?
No, 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 but like I said, don't forget, it's so different than remixing, which I've also done for 5.1, where you're so trying to maintain the integrity of the piece you're working on, because especially if you're working with iconic material, this is stuff we've all grown up with. Everybody loves, they all know what it sounds like. They can sing the guitar solo, you don't want to interfere with that original enjoyment. You want to be able to sit there and create something new. Whereas when I'm doing recording and mixing for immersive, it's a little bit different than that. I try to kind of realize what I'm doing from the beginning and just hope that when I sit down to mix that it sounds like what I imagine it to sound like.
Pre-production critical with multi-channel.
Yes.
Yeah. So Jimmy, I'll come to you before we go to Darcy on the mastering side. Reverbs, delays, all this time-based. How is that changing your thought process with immersive?
Well, my thought process on that is like, I'm trying to expand and open the envelope a little bit. I don't know if you notice in general, I'm not a real reverb man through most of the records that I'm supposedly known for. It's not one of the things I do a lot. And I use natural space, but what I'm experimenting now, like I was talking about the ear thing, it's like I can put a lot of reverbs and stuff back there that won't detract from the lead signal. And it'll probably just give it distance and give it space, and it'll make use of all this great Atmos that we have, or this immersive that we have. And that's what I've been doing. I've been experimenting gingerly. And I was actually about to write an answer that someone had written, and they were like, "What's the point of doing an Atmos mix that sounds as close to the stereo mix as possible?" But I was about to say, unfortunately, I'm making these records for people, record companies that it's about the money for them, and they, and short of being in the studio with an act, a brand new act. Let's say I was with Billie Eilish, for instance. We can do whatever we want to do, and they won't dare question it because she is their act. But they're getting stuff from their acts that's already done, and they don't want to dare push the iceberg. So it's like, I understand. It's like, who am I to tell them what I know creatively could possibly be? Because, at the same time, we could be wrong. The record that was mixed and the way that it was presented, that's what someone is staking their reputation. They're staking their career on that. So I'm here to serve, I'm here to help, and I'm here to experiment and try to, like I said, when I can get with an artist and we're gonna, like Leslie was saying, from day one, if I can know what it's going to be and we're going to be trying this stuff, it could be amazing. The sky is the limit, totally. Unfortunately, this is a real world that I live in, and I like to keep working. So.
And like you say, we have a responsibility on how these initial immersive mixes. I say initial because it's only a couple of years that everybody's really jumping into this, and what we're putting out that a consumer that's not a producer or engineer just loves the artist, hears it and goes, "Oh, I like this. I want more of it," as opposed to maybe not approaching it in a way that's thinking holistically like you are making those decisions. Really, really important that we serve the format, like you said, here to serve. So Darcy, when you're receiving these mixes and going to the mastering process, and I know, Mike, you do some mastering as well, what are some of the variabilities that you're seeing? Because there is a lot of conversation around, well, I've got my ADM file, I can just upload this. But, in terms of looking at the whole picture of what people are putting out on these immersive formats, are you seeing a wide variety, to be gentle with it?
I have not seen as wide a variety as I expected, and that may or may not be a good thing. It seems, first of all, I want to say, when we're talking a lot about Atmos and Sony 360, the object-based formats. And the thing is, the two are really not only are they not compatible, but in some sense, they're actually competitors. So there is no real cooperation between the two. I mean, I'm not saying that there's any animosity between the two companies. The two companies are not developing their formats with the idea that they will interchange well with each other. So so this idea that we can easily, Mike's was talking about this a lot, that you can easily take something sort of tailored for one format and adjust it for another. It's not really a simple process. It's not like you can just, assign things a bit differently and it all runs from start to finish. It takes a lot of going through, as Mike mentioned, the word massaging, finding the events that aren't working in one format the way they're supposed to, and adjusting them so that they work in the new target format. So I think for that reason, a lot of people are doing a fair amount of work essentially channel based. So 714 at the root of it, and then that can become a 7/1 and 4 height objects, or could be a 7/1 bed with 2 rear height objects. That can also be translated into a Sony 360, or it could remain channel based and be released in the Oro 3D format, which is a straight channel based format. So I am finding that a lot of the material that I'm getting in, people have made that choice. Just not saying that you're not moving things around, but you're moving things around in the traditional sense, in that you're moving them around in the channel base. And then it's a matter of being very careful in the mastering process to make sure that that translates well into whichever format it's going to end up as. Another thing is I'm working in Pyramix. Pyramix interfaces, as of Pyramix 14, it interfaces very nicely with the Dolby renderer. Working in Pyramix and controlling the Dolby renderer and monitoring through the renderer, so you can hear what you're actually getting. And what I like about that is, while I am facile with Pro Tools, I'm really doing a lot of my finer work and my final deliverables in Pyramix, so I can stay in that platform and work in the way that I'm accustomed to. And Pyramix allows you to open multiple ADMs in a session. Now, I have done that, but I have not had the experience yet of opening multiple EDMs with a vast number of different objects. In principle, it should handle that for you and create the correct number of different objects you need for each track as part of the session. Assuming over the maximum number of objects, which I believe is 128. So this is something that we've been waiting for a while. In a traditional mastering workflow, it would be typical for the mastering engineer to, in their workstation, to have the mixes of all of the songs on the album in one session. So you can bounce back and forth between them. You can, adjust levels, adjust things to start making it feel like an album before you've even necessarily changed things with the sound. And it helps to end up with a coherent result. And so this idea of being able to put these multiple ADMs in a session rather than having to do one song, quit that, new session, another song, quit that, new session is a really nice feature in the mastering process, to us to work in a workflow that is a lot more similar to the traditional mastering workflow that we've all become accustomed to. Get into that headspace and just stay there without having to sort of go song by song and then try to find ways to compare to the song that we just did and that kind of stuff.
To be able to hear the arc of the whole album, EP,
exactly.
LP, whichever length it is.
Exactly.
So Michael, I'll take this to you because you do some mastering as well. Perceived loudness versus meter watching, right? Because we AES has come out with the loudness recommendations just recently. You hear -18, you hear -22, in that range. I guess you could talk Sony or Atmos, whichever, or just a blend of the two. How are you thinking about Loudness kind of as an arc with the formats that both formats that you're working in? And I'm going to come back to Leslie and Jimmy with this too, in terms of mixing and the loudness in the mix rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess first, Darcy brought it up, and I think it's super important, is like going between the two formats, especially in mastering. I saw a bunch of documentation floating around for a while, like a couple months ago, and from both companies, from Sony and Dolby, where they were trying to use the channel export function to kind of convert between the two formats. And, from what I've seen, that doesn't really work. And so, I've been doing each mix and master kind of independently because the channel-based conversion export doesn't really seem to play nice between the two formats. That being said, and going back to the loudness thing, the way I'm personally approaching it is, I'm not doing a lot of meter watching. I am doing both formats have a scan function built in to make sure you're not exceeding the negative 18 loops, which is, I think, the recommended spec for both formats. I am scanning that, but the way I think Darcy brings up a great point that, importing these ADMs or these architect session files into the same DAW and having them come up in the same EDL is super helpful. The way I've been approaching it is I'm kind of doing the binaural renders right now, especially on like an album. And I'm loading them. After I finish my mix, I load them into a separate session, and I kind of see how, the compression and the limiting is being affected across the entire record to, see how each song is feeling from track to track across the album or EP. And then kind of going back and adjusting compressor and limiting settings on individual objects to kind of bring everything to a uniform sound across the record. When I'm working in a single bass environment, which a lot of the frontline record labels are having us do right now, we're just they're cherry picking their top performing streaming songs, and they're like, okay, this is Pitbull's biggest song, let's get that one done or whatever. In those kind of cases, I'm just I'm taking it from a single mastering perspective, where I'm like, okay, let's just bring this up to a level spec that is within the parameters of each format, and then just make it sound as good as possible, and keeping the sequencing intact.
And have you received a lot of mixes from other mixers that you're now looking at and saying, oh, we're kind of all keeping those all at a certain level? And Darcy, I'm going to ask you the same question about when those are coming in. Are you finding that you still need headroom, or does it really matter how it arrives?
Yeah, I think most of the mixes I've had coming in from outside engineers, no one's really like crushing things through a brick wall limiter in this format, thankfully yet. So most things are falling below the negative 18 loops standard that I've been personally receiving. And again, I'm not speaking for everybody. I'm sure some of y'all have been getting mixes that are far exceeding that scan. And then, that's another thing for the mastering engineers on this format, because in this format, when you do exceed the loops, it does have audible distortion across the board. It's not like pushing something through a brick wall limiter where you're getting just dynamic range distortion. There is like audible, like crackles happening when you start scaling down the streaming functionality, when it's like in with 360 RA, there's like level 0 through 3, and it's like you deliver all of those to the DSP. And if stuff is getting scaled down to level 0 because the consumer has absolutely like no, cell phone connection or whatever, there's clear distortions when you're exceeding that loose standard. So, I'm just trying to, when I'm getting singles in from external engineers, I'm just trying to make sure that everything is kind of copacetic across the board, where I'm not introducing additional distortions and kind of keeping the intent of the song intact.
And Darcy, similar question before I go back to Leslie and Jimmy on receiving, like where these levels are. Are you looking for headroom? Are they already a little loud when you get them?
So far it's been, people have been pretty much on the, on the right path. Conservative, maybe, we can always make it louder. What's important, as has always been the case, is that stuff is not clipping, that we don't have distort to begin with, because you can still drop the level of this material as long as it's not as long as it's not distorted in the first place. So it can still, be adjusted. So it's just important that it's not slammed. And yeah, the target of -18 is an important one. Checking that the binaural in Atmos is not clipping. It's not just about the integrated level for the 5.1, which is where that measurement comes from, and that -1 true peak, but also making sure that that when you have the binaural for that material, that's also not smashing the limiter, because that will have sonic effects as well. Obviously, if you have multiple channels and you combine that into a binaural stream, that 2-channel stream will be louder, the same way combining multiple channels in mix process makes the stereo louder the more channels you add in. So these are things, it's not just about that -18 and -1 true peak for the 5.1, but checking the binaural as well. But it is, I think it's important to say that it's a guideline, and that you also have to use your ears musically. Some material might sound great at -18, some might not, some might need more dynamic, might need more room to breathe. I've worked on an album recently that was 27 tracks, and to get the appropriate relative loudnesses across the album, with the idea that it will be possible someday for people to enjoy it as an album. The range was anywhere from -22.1 to, I think, -16 points was the loudest. But that was, that was one track that was very high energy, and it needed to be there. It still has plenty of headroom. I think the true peak on that is still at -4, but it just needed that energy to be a little bit louder. And some of the other ones were too loud if I had them up around -18. So, we have to keep in mind that it's music, and it's subjective, and the overall experience should be musical in the end.
So, Leslie, did you find yourself monitoring quieter when you added additional channels, maybe even going back to 5.1, now adding even more channels? Do you find the monitoring is softer or louder, or the same?
I tend not to listen too loud anyway, unless I really want to get excited about something. But I'm usually at about 70, 76, somewhere around there. And it doesn't really matter whether I have more channels or less channels. I do use when I'm doing immersive, I do use multi-channel compression just to keep things in control. But I also tend to do a lot of acoustic classical music that has, or orchestra music that has dynamic range that you don't want to stifle necessarily. At the same time, you don't want to get it so quiet that people are turning it up, and then all of a sudden have to turn it down. But I tend to deliver things that leave enough headroom so that, Michael has, but I mean, I do that even with stereo as well. I just find it better to deliver with headroom because some things might be, needed to be added that I haven't accounted for.
So, Jimmy, same question. And if the clients come in and say, turn it up, is it a different thing with immersive? Do you feel they're finding that you need to kind of push those mains when they hear their mix?
No, it's interesting. I think Michael was saying there was a lot of information, a lot of things to read about deliverables and all this other stuff. And quite honestly, while it must be adhered to, I kind of just mix by what feels right and sounds right, because otherwise it's just difficult. And the thing, I'll give you an example. I got this mix in the other day, and they didn't send me the mastered 2-track of it. And everything was nice and it sounded amazing. It was a rockish thing. It sounded freaking amazing. I was like, this is really cool. This should be really simple. And then I got the mastered 2-track in. They were whooping my ass by about 18 dB. No shit, no kidding. And I mean that for real. And I'm going, how the hell am I going to, I mean, I had already basically mixed the record, and here I go. And now I'm just trying to catch them. And even with our conversation, I was realizing, I think I kind of caught them with the level. I think I figured it out, but you know what I didn't do? I didn't listen to the phones. So, you know, part of there's a couple of things here. Right now, the manufacturers are delegating to us what we should be doing as craftsmen. That's problem number one. Because the other thing I've been finding out is, like, I'm used to mixing my records and I'll give it to somebody to master, and then it'll be their problem to figure out how to make it louder, softer, whatever they're gonna do. That's what they do all day. And I'm finding with this stuff, they're taking my files and they're going right to iTunes. Hello. So, you know what I'm saying? It's like everything is a little different now. And I think, wow. And the manufacturer is the one who told me how I'm supposed to be doing this level stuff. And wait a second. Oh, wait, you know a lot about that, don't you? I'm not trying to be cynical or anything. I'm just saying it's kind of the Wild West what we're doing. And it's because of the way the whole structure is structured that I can't give you any quantified answers. I'm just trying to keep up. Like I said, all I want to do is get a hold of that super artist that we can make this record that just everybody just goes, oh my God, it's they must have 7 heads because it's that different. But
so if you had your way with that super artist, would it be thinking immersive all the way from the pre-production stage? Maybe working immersive and like Leslie did, kind of coming back down mixing maybe to stereo?
Absolutely. I that to me that's what this is for. I'm waiting for a champion that we can all sit back and listen and go, holy moly. You know, first of all, mixing in this environment, when you go back to stereo, you realize one thing. In stereo, we were spent all of our time mixing, hiding stuff, compressing stuff, sitting stuff in here. And that's part of the beauty of it. You know what I mean? That's part of what stereo really is. And it just, and there it is. With this, everything opens up. And now there's all the, well, especially with older records, there's all these imperfections that we now see that you didn't see before. And you have to find new ways of hiding it in the new speakers, or maybe not hiding it, maybe finding ways to get the space to actually disappear. I mean, I'm sure there's a more intelligent way of saying what I'm trying to say, and somebody's really thinking about it, but it's fun. And, you know, like I said, to me, what's wrong with it is the fact the manufacturer is controlling the dialogue. That's what's up.
And I know. Oh, go ahead, Leslie.
No, I was just going to say that's, you know, one of the reasons why, you know, not to plug Michael and Darcy, but, you know, that's one of the reasons to have a mastering engineer working on this stuff, because there are so many variables, so many different formats, so many requirements that, Jimmy, I don't think you and I really want to care about that. We just want to make the best sounding thing that we can, and hopefully be able to hand it off to somebody who knows what they're doing and understands all that. And, you know, not to make it their problem, but, you know, we just want to make the best mix that we can in the format that we're working in. And, you know, I have a Grace multi-channel controller that I've set up to AB so that I can have what Atmos does without, because I don't have a renderer here. I don't mix through Atmos. I don't know who does, but that way I can AB between what I'm doing and what it might sound like in Atmos, so that I can tell if decisions I make might get compromised by Atmos and what to do about that.
I think it's important to understand that the mixing mindset and the mastering mindset are really not they're not the same. So to expect to be able to do both of those jobs perfectly simultaneously is really difficult. So I don't want to have to start with 120 different tracks and decide what to do, where to put all of them, and then also try to be aiming to get that at exactly the same level as the song I mixed before that, and that kind of thing. That's that really is kind of ridiculous. And right now, skipping the mastering process, everything is just being viewed as a one-off. It's not part of a whole. It's just each song is a single, so to speak. And I still think that the majority of artists sort of think of their music in terms of albums and chapters in their lives. Even if the songs are not directly related to each other, they come from a certain era in their lives, and they want it that document is a diary of that phase of their lives, and 2 years later is something else, or what have you. Even when things are released as singles, ultimately they are usually part of an album. And for a mix engineer to be able to get all of that right now, not just in 2 channels, but in multiple channels, is that would be a tough goal to achieve, I think. And still have time to actually do the creative aspect of mixing that is so necessary to making it sound good in the first place.
And you're dealing with so many channels, as you mentioned, Darcy. Like, how do you just wrangling that for a mix, let alone then wrangling that for the final master and making sure that you've met all the deliverables, like Leslie just mentioned, makes the mastering process more critical than it was in stereo.
I'm sure Mike will testify to this, but the back end, the delivery end of all of these formats is quite formidable. So, it's not just, you render out a DDP for the CD and a set of 24-bit waves and you're good to go. I mean, I think on this last project that I worked on, it was a 27-song project, and I think I spent 3 times as much time doing, let's call it the technical secretarial work after the actual mastering process than I did actually making audio decisions about how the thing would sound.
That's what I meant by the mastering, what you just said. All those deliverables that I'm having to do, why am I having to do all that? Because it's going directly, it's bypass. And I don't know if this for a fact, by the way, but I'm like, when I look at the manufacturer stuff, and I'm going, whoa, but you want, whoa, hey, there's somebody missing here.
So somebody else should be having this headache. That's what I do. Yeah.
Michael, would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely insane right now. I mean, I'm like, I think we all got spoiled, mastering in stereo for a while, and you would just deliver wave files to most clients, not even a DDP. And now it's like, okay, now for Atmos, I'm delivering an ADM file, the Atmos config file, and all the separate renders as references. And 360 is even a little more nuts. I'm delivering, pre-renders for, different scalable streaming bandwidth. I'm delivering 13.1 render for channel-based playback. And, it's kind of insane. And so, it's taking a lot of time to, just go through the minutia of delivering these files to, whoever your delivery partner is.
Yeah, and all the naming conventions and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I remember, I'm going to date myself now, but I remember complaining when we had to go from making just a CD ref to send out to the client when digital distribution started happening. Oh, now I've got to make the CD master and the 16-bit wave files and the 24-bit wave files and the MQA and the this and the that, and that's looking like like a cakewalk. Right now. Yeah, exactly. I'm ready to go back, anytime now.
So we got about 10 minutes until we're going to get to some Q&A, and there's quite a few of them already in, but I want to go back around. I'll start with Leslie. We've got to go in the same order. what are some things, if you think about this format early on in the process? I mean, we've had surround, but in terms of thinking about immersive, the kind of responsibility we have of getting it right at this stage to make sure what people are hearing, what consumers are hearing, are something that they say, yeah, I want to take the next step and go buy a sound bar, or go install speakers in my house, or I want to upgrade the type of, because what we're putting out as producers and engineers, indie artists, label artists, whichever it is, what are some things, or one thing you think we really have responsibility for at this stage?
Well, you know, I mean, I think it has to be a meaningful representation of the craft that the artist has done. And that's the most important thing. You know, like I said earlier, not everything should be immersive, but there are some things that are fantastic in immersive, and it needs to, I don't know, I feel like when I listen to immersive records, I want it to move me, perhaps if it's legacy stuff, I want it to move me in the same way that the original did, but in a new way as well. So it's compelling. So it just doesn't have a guitar in the back speakers, but it's telling a new story given the equipment and the processing and the technology that we have now to advance the art of what it is we are doing. And and that's what I strive for in the work that I do. It's not just about, oh, well, let's just do immersive and put it out, because I think eventually that's just going to turn people off. They're going to go, well, this doesn't sound very good, or it's nothing interesting to me, so I'm going to kind of write it all off. You know, I mean, I think like I just did a filmed opera, and I don't mean a film of a performance of an opera, but an actual movie of an opera. And of course, we did 5.1 for the release of that, but I'm going to go back in and do a remix 5.1 just for audio. You know, it has to be remixed so it sounds like something different without picture. You have to be as immersed in the vocals and the storytelling without having a picture to guide you for what the emotions are. And so I'm planning next week, actually, to start a new 5.1 mix of that just for music. So if you think of it like that, the difference between stereo and 5.1, I just think it has to be compelling. And if it can't be compelling, then, you know, maybe you should think about doing something else.
And I like that you mentioned 5.1. Not everything has to have height. Just because you have it doesn't mean you have to use it.
Yeah.
And Jimmy, same question. Is there something we all should be doing to make sure this, you know, becomes a format that we want everybody to be involved? You know, 5.1 and 7.1 and DVDA, SACD had its challenges, but, you know, is there something we should be doing to be true to this format as early as possible?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I really don't know the answer to that. It's here. We're trying to work it. I'm enjoying it, and I think that the thing that this time that's interesting is, like, once we're here, I don't think there's any turning back this time. We've been trying this for a long time to expand away from stereo, trying all these different things, but the affordability of it all. Like, understand this, you have your little earbuds, and now you can have the illusion of this particular sound. And to its credit, I don't really hear the stuff going around your head in the headphones like I do in my speakers, but when I take it away, I can hear the flatness of the stereo. So I'm going to go the opposite way and go, when I do hear it flat, I'm like, this doesn't sound as nice as it does the other way. Maybe it's not as Superman-ish and Spider-Man-ish, where, like, things are just crazy. But it does sound a little, it does open up it opens up a little bit more. It really does. And once you've heard it, I think half properly, I think we're all going to enjoy it into the future.
That's perfect. Michael, same idea. or things to avoid even? As Jimmy was talking, I'm thinking, well, there's probably some things that we maybe should be careful of doing or not doing in these formats.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my general, I think Jim brought up a great point, is that, like, for the first time here with all these surround sound formats, and I think a large reason why the other ones kind of failed is because there was a huge like cost barrier to entry for the consumer. On this one, everybody's kind of got headphones, and so everybody can in some capacity consume immersive audio. Whether or not it's the same way, we're consuming it as creators here on, big, surround sound speaker setups, that's a whole other, discussion. But I think at least when I'm approaching these things, I'm trying to make it as compelling as I can in as many formats as I can. And, as we're starting to realize that like a large portion of the consumers are listening to this stuff in headphones, I'm definitely taking that into consideration when I mix. I'm checking things on these speaker systems, but I really think that, making sure that you're giving people a great headphone experience is kind of becoming more and more paramount to this stuff, because that's how people are listening to it. And in trying not to turn people off to the format, I'm finding that, when I make sure my object placement and stuff is translating properly in headphones, I'm getting a better response across the board.
Awesome. And Darcy, anything to add to that?
I think it's important to realize that this is an amazing creative canvas. So, artists now can be thinking in 3 dimensions instead of just in stereo. And I think that aspect of it is worth the growing pains we're going through now. If you look at, Leslie Ann mentioned how much things have changed in the past 18 months. Things have improved exponentially in terms of workflows and tools available and that kind of thing, and will continue to improve. And it will also become easier and easier for those of us on the engineering side of things to learn how to naturally facilitate the artist's wishes. These new guidelines and all these numbers that we're completely obsessed with right now because they're all new will at some point become second nature and part of the music making process. Our job as engineers has always been to take care of the technical translation of the artist's creative idea and get it out to the consumer. And we will get better and better at making that translation. And it will get easier and easier for us as new tools are developed and as we all gain experience in doing it. We don't think too much, I think, in stereo about our gear and that kind of stuff, or we shouldn't be thinking too much about it. It's not about how much gear you use. It's about achieving the results you want. And I think when we all sit down, we kind of work on our gear like musicians play their instruments. You think about what you want to hear and you just make it happen. And I think we'll all get there in the immersive formats as well. It just, it takes time and practice. And as we all get better and the tools get better, I think it's going to be amazing.
Gibbs also, I think in this format, you find, at least in my world, composers that are thinking more about composing for immersive, how their orchestration, how their arrangements are going to get realized in immersive. Instead of thinking about that after the fact, they are actually composing for that. And I would imagine, as Darcy was saying, that non-classical artists, singer-songwriters, composers will start to think about how they work in immersive as well. Whereas, I'm not sure anybody thought of it 10 or 15 years ago about going in the studio and wondering which guitar was going to be on the left and which piano was going to be on the right. But it's completely different now. I think immersive has opened that up to being much more experimental and creative from a composition standpoint too.
And there are a few questions in the Q&A regarding a similar of where do I go for a playlist? And knew this question was coming. It's real simple. Go to Grammy.com and look at the 61st, 62nd, 63rd, and 64th Best Immersive Audio Album winners. You're going to have 5 nominees and a winner so there's 20 to start with in terms of getting a reference from what we all feel are best in class from what our peers are doing. To that end, the workflow, and Leslie, I'll stick with you. Are you finding, because I think a lot of, if they're working with indie artists and saying, okay, budget considerations are completely different, how much longer am I going to take? Like, everybody's different rates and all that, so not getting into dollars, but just time, right? And really budgeting for being smart about how you go about this. What should producers and engineers watching this think about? Okay, my workflow is now going to become twice as much, 3 times as much.
Well, certainly the mixing is going to take longer. I mean, that's obvious. I think, again, pre-production for me is the most important thing. It has been for everything I do, talking to the composer, talking to the artist, trying to get a sense of what they want, what kind of sound they want, planning my microphones around that, planning the layout of the room. All of that is dictated by that conversation. The budget questions about, I just finished something where the artist had every intention of doing an immersive mix, but the recording actually ended up being, it was a full orchestra recording, and ended up being more expensive than he had in his budget. And we met for a post-production and decided that because people are still listening in stereo for most of the time, it was the most important thing for him to get the stereo done. And then once he got the funds done, to do the 5-1. Also, a lot of those decisions are already made in stereo in terms of where things are spaced, reverb, delays, things like that. Granted, this is an orchestra, so it's not a heck of a lot you're going to do to it anyway, if I've done my job right. I just think it's really the mixing, and for some people, they prefer to do 5-1 first and then do stereo. But it's all about the budget. It's about what the format is that you're going to do. If high res is important to you, then do Oro 3D. If 2448 is fine for you, then Atmos is, okay. If you're going to do primarily headphones, maybe 360 is where you want to go. I think all those things are things that you have to think about if you're going to try and follow through with the best format, or you just pick something like Atmos, go to a great mastering engineer and let them figure it out.
And Jimmy, similar question. Time changing in terms of what you're spending mixing?
I think, you know what, it depends. Some records I'm actually mixing quicker because I have a guide as to what I'm supposed to be doing. It's when I don't have that, and when I get some of those older records which don't have stems and stuff, I'm taking a long time. It's really hard to just recreate. Like the thing is, all that hidden stuff that made that jam, and probably from a board or something, you have no idea what they put in that sucker. And if they got no stems, you'll be here a while. I've of course, I made records back in the day, of course, but it's like, I don't know what console they're using. Like take drums, you got 13, 14, 15 mics. If you pick any one of them, that's not the one that they led with. And if you EQ it wrong, you'll be there all day. Which I've been here. I'm still here.
You haven't left. Michael, similar question.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think like Jimmy said, if there are no stems, it's, and you have to go back to that and start recreating stems to match the stereo release, you're going to be spending a lot of time, especially on some of these like older iconic songs. It's like, you can't, change the way the guitar sounds on a Led Zeppelin song. Like it's got to have that tone. So you got to sit there and figure out what they did. So those kind of things are adding a lot of time. I think if I'm working with, absolutely perfect prepared stems that match the stereo release, both in terms of sonic, presentation and sequencing, I'm spending about anywhere, depending on how many, stems and objects there are, I'm spending like 3 to 5 hours ish on a mix for this per format, and about an hour on, a single mastering it on top of the stereo.
That's super helpful. I mean, because that gives people watching this an idea. Okay, I need to allocate X amount of time. You've been doing it a while, right? That time, I'm sure, has changed as you've got your workflow down.
That's the other thing. Yeah. If it's like your first few, probably budget, a day or two to do one of these mixes, because, you're not like quick with the hotkeys and the workflow and all that stuff. So, and that's just, as we all know, that's just going to come with time and practice on this stuff.
It is. And most indie artists aren't looking to pay for your learning curve, right? They're looking to say, okay, here's what I have, to do, and the time I have to do it. So I want to make sure we get to Q&A for what's in there. We've still got quite a few here. And the a few we've talked about. Center channel. This comes up quite a bit. Some artists actually don't want, if we're talking about vocals, don't want their vocal in the center channel, don't want it isolated. They or how that's used. So I'll go backwards. I'll start with Michael, then Jimmy and Leslie. So center channel usage, a lot of it, a little, and with 360, right, you've got 3 layers of LCR, right? So how much is sitting kind of in that, I don't want to say mono space, but center space?
For me, it depends on the track, right? I think for most of the stuff, if I'm getting prepped stems, most of the time they're sending me that acapella track anyway. And so for me to create, I'd have to go back and create the mono stem. And sometimes I do that just for impact and punch of the vocal, because if it's going through a binaural renderer, sometimes you lose that kind of like forward facing kind of voicing of the lead vocal. But if I'm working with a stereo stem, I'm not, it's a phantom center. I'm not putting it direct. I'm not collapsing the stereo stem into a center channel and doing it that way.
Jimmy, a lot of center channel, no center channel, phantom center.
I don't really prescribe to the center channel. Even though like sometimes like Michael, I will have a mono signal, but I won't use the center channel. I won't use that center speaker. I mean, for me, I've always felt that the phantom center has worked fine before, and it kind of works fine now for me still. I just maybe sometimes I pull it out away from the actual back of the backdrop. I'll pull it out a little bit so it's sitting a little closer to the listener. But yeah, I actually take the center speaker out in general when I do that kind of stuff.
And then Leslie, I'm going to ask you 2-part and then go back to Jimmy, Michael, and Darcy. Center channel usage and LFE, because bass management is a whole other thing in immersive.
Yeah, well, center channel, I can tell you for vocals, I do use the center channel, but I'm wide with it. And one of the reasons is that if you do phantom center with 5.1 to me, and you're not sitting in the sweet spot and you're listening, off to the side, then you're going to hear your vocal shift off to the side. You're going to get a little vocal in the left if you're on the left, and a little vocal on the right if you're on the right. You're going to lose the anchor in the middle. So, well, I don't put the vocal exclusively in the center channel. I do spread it out a bit, so it's a little wider, but the focus is still in the middle. And then I might use delays or reverbs to kind of make it bigger. And LFE, when we record here, we have a DBX 120 box that is a subharmonic box. And I usually hang a microphone just for LFE. It's right above the conductor. and it takes everything in the room, but it goes through the subharmonic box and gets recorded as the LFE. So it's already filtered, and it just adds this nice kind of height in a low end sort of way to the low end sound. I usually don't have to then take stuff and send it to an aux because I've already got it, unless I'm doing a chorus or something like that where I want extra low end. Then I might take the basses from the chorus, put them through the DBX box to add a little more foundation to it. And if I'm doing pop stuff or remix stuff, then sometimes I'll put it through the LFE, or I'll just put it through the sub box, and that's what goes to the sub.
Jimmy, bass management, probably big on some of those records you're working on.
Well, don't really use it a lot. And what's interesting to me is like the 360 doesn't really have a sub. And the records that I was doing when I'm having to do it in both formats, they both have their own kind of bottom. I don't know how they achieve it, but they do, and it seems to be just fine. It's not quite as dynamic as the bottom that I get out of the Atmos using a dedicated sub. But I'm not really sending a lot through it except for kicks and bass, basically. And I'm sure there's more to be had. But as Michael said, I'm busy playing around too much instead of getting this stuff done. So I can only experiment so much. Otherwise, I would still be here. I mean, really, you can go crazy with this stuff. You really, really can. It's just a matter of eventually you want to get done and be able to sit back and really enjoy it and move on to the next one.
So we only have about 2 minutes, but Michael and Darcy, quickly on LFE bass management.
So the reason it's not recommended to use the LFE channel for all of your bass management is because sometimes it gets dropped. So in Sony 360, it doesn't have an LFE at all, and some of the other formats don't include it in their headphone renderings. So to me, it makes more sense to put the bass information in the other speakers or objects and save the LFE for very low sub stuff.
Yeah, but that's kind of interesting, man. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I would imagine, though, in a headphone experience, what I'm trying to achieve with the LFE, you wouldn't experience in headphones anyway. So even if it got dropped, it might not matter.
I think that's sort of the important point, is that in a headphone, you're not going to really experience that properly anyway. So it can be a nice effect, and you should use it for things that can accentuate the musical experience, but it shouldn't be something that your entire mix is dependent on, because it will be so dependent on where it's played back and how it's played back, and if it's in headphones, if it's in speakers, on what speakers, is it bass managed. So it can add something to the experience, but it shouldn't be terribly essential. If you want heavy low end on your material, it's going to have to be in the main channels as well.
And we've got 60 seconds, so I'll make this kind of a yes/no. Super common question, and it's in the Q&A. Separate mix for speaker, separate mix for binaural. Leslie, yes, no?
I have not done that yet.
Jimmy, yes, no? 2 separate mixes?
I've been doing it a little bit, but I'm like I said, I'm trying to merge them so I'm trying to make it so they both kind of compromise to each other.
Find each other. Mike?
No, same mix.
And Darcy?
Yeah, it's a lovely idea. I think it's too time consuming. No one's going to want to pay for it. I think there are things that we can do in mastering that might help. The translation adjustments that you can make when choosing your binaural parameters and that kind of thing that will help without having to have a completely different mix from one to the other.
Thank you for distribution, right? You're really uploading one ADM or one way, depending on the ingestion, but you're uploading one file. So having that all within for the re-renders would make the point. So
yeah.
Michael, Leslie, and Jimmy, Darcy, thank you. Maureen, thank you for putting this together, and the Peony Wing for having us on this discussion today. Super important content. It's going to be up on the YouTube channel on Grammy.com soon. So you'll be able to go watch anything that you may have missed. We didn't get all the questions, but really, really awesome conversation. So thank you all for participating today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for moderating.
You got it. Happy to do it. Have a good day, everybody.